I couldn't help but notice that you've clicked on and are presently listening to an episode of the Paranormal Patio podcast. Thanks a lot. I appreciate your support. And if you want to continue to support us, the best thing you can do is share our episodes on social media. That's right. You can tag us in everything. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find us on paranormalpatio.com, where you'll find articles, links to information from our past guests, as well as, every episode as it comes out. Also, head on over to Patreon. Patreon.com/BeyondThePatio. You can get a monthly live stream, at least one. Sometimes we do more. Exclusive bonus content, early access to all of our episodes. And starting with Season 3, I've got to move Season 1 to the archives. So they'll be on Patreon as well, and you can listen to them there. Thanks again for your support. And hey, let's get into the episode. What kind of weird thing are we talking about today? Today we're talking with Taylor Ellwood, prolific author and experimental magician. Yeah, that's right. We're going to get into that. Also, we're going to get into space-time magic, pop culture magic, and how Taylor operates from a magical perspective and sort of from a philosophical approach too. And it's a very interesting conversation. I recommend picking up one of his books. Give it a shot. If you like it, pick up some more. There are links available in the show notes wherever you're listening to this. I think you'll enjoy the conversation. I know I did. I got a little bit more insight into an author who I have read, and that's fun for me. I love finding someone who has put something out that resonated with me on some level and then getting to talk to them about it. It's the best thing about this job. I hope that comes through in the interview that you're about to hear. So let's get into it. Let's welcome Taylor Ellwood to the Paranormal Patio.
You're listening to the Paranormal Patio podcast.
Welcome back to Paranormal Patio. As always, I am Jason, and I'm joined tonight by a writer and magician. Do you prefer magician? Is that the title that you use?
I mean, you can use that if you want. Magical Experimenter works as well. I mean, that is my website, magicalexperiments.com, so.
I love it. Magical Experimenter, prolific author. I mean, the book list is insane. We'll get into that in a second. Taylor Ellwood, welcome to the Paranormal Patio. How are you tonight?
I'm doing great, sir. Thank you so much for having me on here. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to speak with you and also get to connect with your listeners.
Yes, absolutely. I've been looking forward to this conversation. We talked just a second ago about how I was in Nashville, Tennessee back in September for a paranormal conference, and I was talking to my good friend Kyle Cadell, and I said, hey, are there any good local bookstores around here? He goes, I'm going to McKay's tomorrow, and McKay's is this giant used bookstore. So I thought, well, I'm going to go, and I went. I'm looking through all the the weirdo books, like I like to call them, all the weird stuff, and I see this book. It says Space-Time Magic, and all I see is the spine, and I'm like, well, that's got my name all over it. I'm gonna grab that. So I added it to my stack, and it was actually the first book that I started reading, and then things got insane, and I haven't had a chance to finish it, but I have a feeling I'm going to get a much better understanding just talking to the source tonight. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about many other books. You have a source of information that is just massive. We'll just kind of let the conversation steer naturally, and we'll get into it. So before we really get into the discussion, I'd like to give you a few minutes, kind of talk about yourself, talk about what you're doing with your life and how things are going, and give everybody that's listening a little bit of a background on Taylor Ellwood.
Oh, okay. Well, my name is Taylor Ellwood, and my website is magicalexperiments.com. I have written over 44 books at this point. And I've also that's not including anthologies that I've edited. So I mean, I've actually done a fair amount of writing over the years and continue to. I'm currently working on 3 different book projects right now. One's called The Inner Alchemy of Wintering. One is called The Hypnodrift, which is a co-authored book with a fellow by the name of Ingo Commenda in Germany. And then I'm also working on Walking with Elemental Spirits. And all of these books are in one form or another and various degrees of completion. So that's kind of me. I have, up until recently, I was living in Portland, Oregon. And then I moved down to Eugene, Oregon, which is where I live now, and kind of restarting my life. Went through huge number of changes this year. Got a divorce, kind of started my life all over again. And so that's kind of been its own fun thing. And, it's kind of interesting because I use a fair amount of space-time magic in order to get to where I'm at right now in my life. Insofar as finding a home, getting a job, all these other things. And of course, I'm still actively and prolifically writing, and I'm also in the process of actually manufacturing even more changes in my life right now. I'm actually in the process of buying a house. My first time ever doing this, and it's just been kind of an interesting thing. And again, some space-time magic played a role in that. So I'm sure we'll get into all of this tonight, but it's just kind of an interesting thing where you can kind of say, like, okay, what are the different ways that, since we're talking about this topic, that we can apply it? And as I'm going to tell you all, you can apply it any number of different ways. So that's a little bit about me.
That's fantastic. I didn't know this ahead of time, but I love when these little connections in my life pop up to the guests that I'm interviewing. The mention that you have just moved to Eugene, Oregon, right?
Yeah.
So when I first started getting into all manner of weird things whenever I was a teenager, one of the first things that I gravitated towards was astral projection and lucid dreaming, and I've talked about that considerably on my show. But one thing I haven't really mentioned was that I quickly found my kind of niche into that community with a message board. Date myself here a little bit. A message board for Jonas Ridgway, who lived in Eugene, Oregon. So, fun little fact.
Oh, wow. There's a little bit of synchronicity there. Yeah, you're not just dating yourself, you're probably dating me too, because I know message boards pretty well.
Back in the days of Yahoo Chat and ICQ and message boards, man, that was the life, I guess, in Napster.
That was the life. That was the online life. That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And don't forget AIM.
Yeah, well, I didn't use AIM because for whatever reason, I had this bias against AOL. I don't know what it was. I think it was the obnoxious CDs that they would send nearly every other day through the mail. My friend and I learned that if you put a CD in a microwave, it causes a short lightning storm across the surface of it. And we did that frequently because we would combine our stacks of AOL CDs, and on boring Saturday afternoons, that's what we did.
AOL hell.
AO hell. Yeah. So totally fun. Totally cool. I definitely want to start the conversation off with space-time magic, just because of my familiarity with loose familiarity with your work on the subject. The first thing that I noticed about your book was it wasn't exactly what I was expecting. I don't know what I thought I was going to find. Maybe I thought it was going to be a little kooky and a little do this ritual to travel in time and space, and I feel that it's not directly that. And if you could kind of give your working explanation of what space-time magic is to you and how you apply it in your life, I think it would be beneficial to the conversation.
Sure. Space-time magic is basically the manipulation of the variables or the elements of space and time in order to turn possibilities into reality. We live basically in a linear notion of time. We look at our clocks and everything, but this linear notion of time is very artificial. It's induced by, the need to, by a capitalist world, but up until that capitalist world, really came into play, beforehand, majority of society never lived with clocks or looked, I think they lived in a very rhythmic cycle of, day turning into night, the seasons transforming, years going by, all this other stuff. And so a lot of my approach to time is really working with this linear, or not this linear notion of time, but this very rhythmic seasonal approach to time, and also a nonlinear approach to time, recognizing that fundamentally time is actually much more of a perceptual thing than an actual reality, and that we can play with that perception quite a bit. We can experience, for example, time dilation, where, if you meditate for a while, your sense of time distorts and changes from what your everyday consciousness experience of it is. And then, where we bring the space into the factor is that, our space is really where we manifest this. Space is the material realization of time. And what I mean by that is I'm not talking about outer space. I'm really talking about, for example, right now I'm sitting in my home, and here's this specific space that I have an identity in, that I'm situated in. And there are certain levels of possibility that are available to me. I could pick up a glass of water and drink it right now. I can, of course, talk on this interview. I could be writing a book. I could be doing other things. And these are the obvious things. But then what space-time magic looks at is like, how can we take the improbable possibilities and manifest them into reality? How can we take something that seemingly wouldn't be, that's not necessarily as easy to manifest, and turn it into a reality that allows us to transform our lives? So like in my case, using the example of a house, I started looking for a house recently in Eugene, Oregon. It's the first time I've decided to ever buy a home. And it's kind of interesting because my approach to it has been very intuitive. I got on Zillow like I imagine most everyone does these days. And, I looked for places. But I looked at a bunch of places, and I really, other than the very first one where I was like, okay, this could be it. But then I wasn't that enthusiastic about it. None of the other places really called to me. And then finally, I woke up one day, and I had actually told my realtor I wasn't going to be looking for a while. And she's like, oh, you're just going to pause and save? And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to pause and save and just kind of do my thing. But then like a week later, I woke up, and I'm like, and I just knew this is the day you're going to find your home. It was like Friday. And so, not this Friday, but last Friday, actually. So I went and I got onto Zillow, and I found a few different places, and I sent them to her. And the very first home we visited was the place. And it was interesting because it's a home where it's a 1940s home. And there's a little bit of repairs that are needed for it, but it's being offered around $300,000. Well, if you live in the West Coast, you know that that's actually really decent. Anything below $300,000, you basically know you're going to have to do some fixing up. This house needs a little bit of fixing up, but it's not that bad. All the other places that I'd seen around that price range needed a lot more work. And it was just kind of interesting how things just came effortlessly together for me to find this place and to realize like this was going to be the home I was going to get. And so now I'm in the process of going through and getting this home. And it was a matter of trusting my intuition, which is really a different form of time sense, an awareness of time that kind of just goes off of like, here's this probability that you can manifest. And then finding this home that was in the right price range that I could afford, having everything else line up in order to start manifesting it. And so now I'm in this process of buying this home. Things are starting to come together, and it's kind of it's just a very interesting process and a realization on my part. So why I share that is because, this is a very subtle thing, but I would say, when I look at space-time magic can be something like that, but sometimes space-time magic can be something big. Like, when I was working with the planetary energies of Saturn this summer, I had two very interesting experiences. One was where I worked with Saturn, and he kind of pulled back the curtains and showed me like, here's these levels of possibility that you have available to you. You feel like you're trapped in your circumstances, but you aren't. You could get a job as a mail carrier. You could get a job, delivering Amazon packages. You could get a job as a customer support rep. You could get a job doing these other things. And of course, you can continue writing. And I explored these things and kind of manifested about 5 or 6 different possible realities all at the same time. And then ended up backing out of each of them. And then later on, that next month, July, I ended up meeting my magical partner. This was a person who was really significant and special to me, and I wanted to, there was just this instant recognition that I needed to work with this person, and I felt like there was a need to explore that. And this person happened to live down in Eugene, so I decided to go back to Saturn and pull back the curtains again, and lo and behold, I was able to get a job that was like 100% remote doing customer support. It's a dull, boring job, but it's perfect when you've gone through a lot of life changes where you kind of need something to just kind of like not like be too exciting, and you need your life to just kind of relax and stabilize. And then I ended up moving down here, and in the process of moving down here, the rent market was really saturated, and I was able to manifest an apartment within half a week. Actually, a small, like a cottage, not even an apartment, like a cottage that's all my own. And now, of course, I'm manifesting a house. So it's like all these things are coming together very nicely through space and time. Magic, and some of it's working with planetary magic, some of it's working with other things, but it's just a matter of kind of bringing things together and allowing it to effortlessly come into play and working with the current.
Yeah.
So this is kind of what space-time magic is, and of course in my book I have a bunch of different books. I should say I have 3 books in the series: Space-Time Magic Foundation, Space-Time Magic, and then Magical Identity. And I have a future book that I'm going to be working on down the line. I'm doing a lot of reading and research on it. At the point, it'll be it probably won't be written for a few years, but it's going to be a continuation of this work. So that's in a nutshell, what space-time magic is all about.
I'd like to say that I appreciated the learning curve with the second space-time magic book, which is the one I have. It kind of starts out, if you don't know anything about anything in this realm, in this sphere of, magical practice, it's very beginner friendly. And then as you progress through the book, it definitely turns the volume up slowly, notch by notch. And I think that's a great approach. Do you take that approach with most of your other work too?
I do. I mean, I would say that my books, for the most part, are written for intermediate to advanced practitioners of magic, but I've written them I've tried to write them in mind with the fact that there are going to be people who are going to pick them up who may not have a lot of experience with magic and still want to learn. The way that I approach my writing in general is, at least my nonfiction writing, is that it's really done around the notion that, you're going to read this book and you're going to get something from it the first time through, and then you're going to pick it up and read it again in a few years, and you're going to get something entirely different because of the experiences that you've had. Because that's what I found with books in general, that, you read a book once, and your experience of it is really informed by where you're at the time and the lack of familiarity you have with the material. You come back to it a few years later and you read it, and your relationship with that work just transforms the way you think about things and because you've ideally at that point gotten some experiences under your belt. And I will say that my approach to magic and really learning magic is that I self-taught myself reading books. It's interesting because, you can't always learn everything from reading books. My magical partner and I got into a conversation recently where we were talking about martial arts, and she made the point that, you can't learn martial arts from reading a book. And I would agree with her. Mm-hmm. It's pretty much nigh impossible to do that. You just can't. You have to actually have it modeled for you. Ideally, you have somebody there correcting you. I mean, with the pandemic, of course, it's been kind of interesting. I've been learning Qigong through energyarts.com, and I've been doing like these live stream things. And you definitely learn a lot from it, but I'm sure that when I eventually get around to going out to the actual workshop space and being there in person, that it'll be a different experience altogether, because it'll be live. But if I tried to learn that stuff just reading it wouldn't work. Mm-hmm. You can learn the theory. With magic, on the other hand, you actually, if it's done right and you have exercises in the books, and as you probably noticed in my book, I had a fair number of exercises.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's really, you can actually learn from a book. And really, when you look at the majority of books out there on magic and the occult, that's the way they're written. It's written to help you learn from the book, because not everybody would have access. I mean, going back to what we were joking about dating ourselves, I started practicing magic in the early 1990s, and definitely back then it wasn't nearly as prevalent or public as it is now. Now I think you could probably swing a dead cat and hit a magical teacher in the face. It wouldn't be that hard.
Maybe where you are.
But it also depends. I mean, it depends on where you're at. Too. Like if you're in the Midwest, like I grew up in Pennsylvania, and fairly conservative parts of Pennsylvania.
Okay, yeah.
And so and I've lived in the Midwest. West Coast is a bit different, but even in the West Coast, it depends. And I mean, I think in general, those kinds of relationships where you have a teacher. So, if you're fortunate enough to have one, it's great, but not everyone does. I mean, I only encountered the two people that I would consider to be teachers / mentors in my life in the last few years of my life. And I've been doing this for almost 30 years now. Yeah. So I really found that I am the best teacher. So I write my books with that in mind. Like, really, it's about teaching a descriptive approach to magic and helping people become their own best teacher. Like, I hope that they learn something from my books and get something out of it. But ultimately, what I try to encourage them to do is to experiment. And so it is really written with that notion of you ideally have some experience under your belt. If you don't, you can still make it work. It's just that you're going to probably find that you're going to come back to it a few years later and read it in a very different way because you're going to have had more experience at that point.
To kind of expand on what you had just talked about as far as finding someone in your area that would be a helpful magical teacher, I think there's a lot of disconnect amongst different schools of magic that believe that their way is the only way. And if you fall into one of those groups where, say, you can only find someone locally that practices Thelema, then they are going to tell you this is the only way that this works and there are no other ways. Whereas you look at the grand scope of different magical practices, and there are as many different ways to practice as there are people who practice it, right? And I think it's important that you really look around if this is something that you're looking for and find something that speaks to you on a personal level. Would you agree?
Absolutely. In fact, I would say that, if you were to look at my magical path, I started out learning neo-shamanic techniques and learning hermetic elemental magic. And then I got into Golden Dawn magic. And then from there, I started practicing energy work and exploring some of Robert Anton Wilson's thoughts and perspectives and John Lilly's thoughts and perspectives on the human body. And then I got into William G. Gray's works. He's another ceremonial magician. And I got into chaos magic and Franz Barden and on and on and on. I've learned a wide variety of different magical approaches over the years, and I'm still learning. I'm learning a ton, even now. It's kind of an interesting thing because you can never really stop. If you stop learning, you're dead. That's my thought on the matter, really. I'll just put it that way. It's kind of interesting. I had this person I knew years and years ago when I lived in State College, PA. And he introduced me to William G. Gray, so I'm always thankful to him for that. But he was 30 years old at the time. And I was talking about magic one day. I was telling him about some experiments I was running with pop culture magic. And he stuffily told me that wasn't real magic. And then he said to me that, he gave this world-weary sigh. 30 years old, he gives this world-weary sigh about how he'd learned everything there was to learn about magic. It's wow. I hope I never feel that way. And it was such an interesting thing. And I shortly after broke off contact with him because I realized he just lacked the creativity and imagination that was really needed to practice magic. And I think that when you practice magic, or any kind of discipline, you always have to be open to learning. I'm 45 years old and I'm still learning new stuff all the time about magic, about other things. I'm fortunate enough right now that I'm getting the opportunity to, I have a couple mentors. I have the opportunity to work with a magical partner who is teaching me a lot from her practice, and I'm hopefully doing the same for her. But these things are really important. And I think it's one of those cases where you're always learning, you're always exploring. And if you're not learning and exploring, and if you're not challenging what you know to discover what you can learn, you're missing out on something fundamental. So even though I've written a ton of books on magic, I would tell you that even the act of writing those books is a journey of learning because I'm learning something in the process of writing them. Even though I quote unquote know the material, I'm still negotiating with it and discovering it in a different way. And I'm negotiating and discovering the spirits or whatever it is that I'm writing about in a different way. And I think a lot of times, people can get stuck on themselves, stuck on their magical practice, this one true way. But the problem with that one true way approach to things is that it really ends up creating a stagnant perspective on magic and a stagnant perspective on your life. So I'd say to anyone who is listening to this, who maybe has only quote unquote learned one true way, branch out, pick up a book about something that's totally different from what you've learned and read it. And do the exercises in it and see how it transforms your perspective on what you're already doing and how it transforms your approach to magic. Because I guarantee you will find yourself discovering things that you hadn't realized. And you'll be and some of those things will be wow, this is similar to what the one true way that I've learned. But other of those things will challenge that one true way and help you actually consider different thoughts and perspectives than you would have realized otherwise.
Would you say that the amount of success that a person would find with magic is correlated with how much they believe the system that they are using is going to work for them? Or do you think that it's more broad than that?
That's a great question. I think belief definitely plays a role. You have to be willing to suspend disbelief to a certain degree with magic. But I also try to maintain a skeptical awareness of my own magical work. And it's what helps me identify like what isn't working when stuff isn't working, what is working when stuff is working. So I think like you have to be I think you have to be open to entertaining the possibility that belief certainly plays an important role, but that it can be broader than that. I've had too many magical workings occur where things kind of came out of the blue that had nothing to do with belief, but nonetheless played a very relevant role in what I was doing and helped me manifest what I wanted. To think that it's just belief alone that does it. It's kind of similar to that whole intention trap that I see. If you're like, well, just set your intention and that'll be enough for magic. And it's like, well, no, we're not doing the law of attraction here. We're not just setting intention. We actually have to take action. We actually have to do something. And if you have to do something, it's not enough to simply believe at that point. You're taking action. You're doing something about it. For example, going back to the house hunting thing, if I wasn't looking for houses, a house isn't just going to plop itself in my lap. I mean, I certainly hope not. I'll be dead for one thing, like the Wicked Witch of the West. But
exactly what I flashed to, yeah.
But the other fact of the matter is, if I'm not actively out there looking, it's not going to help me. I'm not going to get a house. But if I'm actively out there looking and using the tools and everything else, I can take that and turn it into a process that feeds into the magic and feeds into my intuition and helps me find the right place. And from there, I can manifest that and turn it into a desired reality. And I can have very specific parameters in mind. Like in my case, my parameter was really like, I want to be able to move into a house where I recognize there's probably going to be some work, but I don't want it to be a lot of work. I don't want to have to be spending a ton of money on this. And the amount of money that I have to spend, I want it to be something where it's still going to be a good house in the end. And the house I found, it's basically around $10,000 of work, which some people might be like, well, that's a lot of money, Taylor. And yes, it is. It's a chunk of change. But compared to some places that could be a real money pit, it's not that much. It's a drop in the bucket. And when I think about the fact that the house is really well made overall, and like that, the person who was sent out to do like estimated as far as like being a contractor was like, this is actually a really good place. I'm just thinking to myself, yep, because that's how we roll in Taylor Ellwood's Land of Magic. We find the best possibility. We factor in that certain things may come into a play, but we don't ever. And we factor in the variables, but at the same time, we manifest the desired reality. You can't boil that down to belief. You have to be willing to go beyond that. Belief alone is not going to make magic work.
At the risk of spoiling your book on space-time magic, could you elaborate for people who maybe this is the first time they've ever even heard or considered of practicing magic in the modern day? Can you expand or elaborate on an example of what some of your exercises may look like in terms of coming into this working with space-time magic?
Sure. Well, for example, one technique I have is called the sigil web technique, and it's a technique where you basically take your life and you create symbols to describe the different facets of your life that are good and the ones that need to go or need to be worked on. And each symbol represents that. So you have at the center, you have this sigil that represents you. And then out of it, you have things you might have like a sigil that represents your career. You might have a sigil that represents, a person in your life. You might have other things, a home or whatever else. And what you're doing then is you might create sub-sigils, basically sigils that modify what you're trying to accomplish with those things. And then what you're going to do is you're going to cut out the sigils that don't serve you in any way, shape, or form, and you're going to burn them and get rid of them. You're basically getting rid of the bad influences, things that don't work. And then what you're doing is you're taking what's left, and you basically can do a couple different things. You can pop it onto the background of, pop it up on your wall in the background and just kind of let it soak into your consciousness for a while you're doing your thing each day. And then when you're ready, go ahead and burn it and get rid of it and kind of allow it to go and manifest into the world. You could color it. You can do all kinds of other different things with it. You can interact with it. But the real point is that you want to make it your own. You're basically creating your life from the ground up using this sigil web technique. And that's just one example of a technique that I have developed over the years. And that's an exercise. Another exercise I have in there is a technique where you can basically go and interact with an alternate version of yourself. And the way it works is that you essentially have these different alternative versions. Some are more successful, some are less. Some have different things going on. And actually, I'm going to caveat, it's not that they're more or less successful. It's just that in certain ways they have their life more together or less together than maybe you have it. But in other ways, they might have their life more together than the way you have it, Like I might meet a version of me that is more socially suave and emotionally aware than I am. And I can draw upon that version's skills using space-time magic, basically meditating and connecting with that one. And at the same time, he might draw on my skills as a magician or as a writer, to be better at writing or thing, because we have all these different possibilities. So those are a couple of examples of techniques that I have in that book.
Those are some good techniques. I would say that the question may come up as to, in working with the sigil web sort of thing, you would cut out and burn the ones that you don't want, but then also later burn the ones that you do want to send out. Is there a differentiation in the actual act of burning those because you would look at it from the outside with, no perspective of magic and say, well, you're burning this one to get rid of it, but you're burning this one to make it happen. So what's the difference between the two?
Well, the first one is an act of banishment. You're releasing what doesn't work. And you're scattering it to the wind, scattering it away from you to help you get where you want to go with your life and allowing it to just move on. The second one maybe is one where, you've got it all charged up and ready to go. It's juiced. You know what you want to manifest. And now you're letting it go, but you're doing it with the notion of allowing it to manifest and turn into a reality. And the main difference is that really, like in one case, you're getting rid of something. It just doesn't serve you anymore. It's done. It's gone. It's going to go away. Like a bad smoking habit, for example. I actually had someone who used this technique once to get rid of their smoking habit. They were able to quit cold turkey shortly after and didn't have any issues. They tried quitting all kinds of different ways, and they basically used this sigil technique to get rid of it. And then what they did afterwards is they focused on building a healthier lifestyle, everything else, and that was part of the sigil web. So they designed that into their sigil web, and they kind of kept it around them for a while. And then one day they're like, you know what? I'm ready to fully manifest this. I've stopped smoking. Now I want to manifest, a healthier diet, a better life, all these other things. And so they burned it. And then afterwards they found that their behaviors were changing. And what the main difference is that with the ones that you're getting rid of, you've drawn them up and then you're getting rid of them right off the bat. You're not keeping them around. The other ones you're keeping around and you're letting them saturate your subconsciousness, letting them become part of your identity, transforming who and what you are in order to make you ready to manifest them into reality.
Very good explanation. Thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah, of course.
The next thing I kind of want to move into is something that you had kind of brought up in passing, which is your work with pop culture magic. Can you let everyone that's listening kind of get a feel for what that means to you?
Sure. Well, the first solo book I ever wrote was Pop Culture Magic, and I've written, again, 3 books in that series, Pop Culture Magic 2.0 and Pop Culture Magic Systems as well. And what pop culture magic does is it basically applies the concept and practice of magic and the structures of magic to pop culture. Because really what I found is that magic in general is something that is very swappable. What do I mean by that? I mean that you can take out classical elements, traditional elements of magic and swap them out for pop culture or modern culture. Because what are we dealing with here? Okay, we want to work with, say, the Greek gods, right? We have very specific practices that we do. We work with them, we petition them, everything else, and then we decide at some point, hey, I want to work with pop culture. We can take those same practices and apply it to pop culture spirits, pop culture characters, etc. Now, some people will listen to this and they'll be like, that's blasphemy, it's heresy. My response to that is, well, the Greek myths were basically the ancient pop culture of their day. They were the pop culture of their time. They were stories that were shared in order to explain why certain things happened and to also connect the people who were listening them to the spirits in the world around them in a way that was transformative for them. Well, it's no different than looking at modern day culture. The main difference is the form of media has changed, but we're still telling stories. We're still using stories to explain how the world works. We're still using stories to entertain ourselves and to educate ourselves. So that's really how I look at pop culture magic. And, when I first read about it many years ago, there's certainly a lot of resistance to it. But nowadays I look at it and, there are a lot of people who are practicing pop culture magic and find it to be very relevant to their spiritual path. And it just speaks to the efficacy of the work. If you have a basic undergrounding of how magic works, you can take it and apply it to anything and get it to work. And that to me is a sign of something that is a solid system of practice, when you can take it and apply it to anything. You don't have to keep it in the original context. You can take it out of that context and still turn it into something relevant and meaningful that is transformative for your life.
In a way, I found parallels to what little research I had done into what your take on pop culture magic is. I found parallels to Grant Morrison's The Invisibles comic series, where he basically used an entire comic series as a hyper sigil to manifest things into his life. And it's kind of a reverse of what you're talking about. And I always found, Grant Morrison's, how do I word this without sounding terrible? There have been some accusations against Grant Morrison in his personal life, but I've found that his professional work is always really interesting, kind of off topic. But again, going back to this creating a magical system, a working of sigil magic that plays out being charged by everyone who reads this comic book, which was wildly successful. And you're kind of talking about tapping into that energy in another way, and I find that really interesting.
Well, I am. I mean, I'm familiar with Grant Morrison's work, certainly, and I think it's a pretty powerful way to do things. But I think there's a lot more to pop culture magic than just what Grant Morrison put out there. My own approach is, how do you take the pop culture that you love and turn it into a viable system of magic? How do you work with the fiction characters? How do you create practical magic techniques? How do you take modern day technology and turn it into magic? Yeah. And you can. There's no reason that you can't. It's one of those cases where a lot of times people don't fully grasp what is available to them, because again, we have these categorizations, these very structured notions of what something is or isn't. And really, I mean, if you look at my work in general, all of the books that I've written a series on inner alchemy. I've written a series on, space-time magic, pop culture magic, a how magic works series, a spirit series, all of that. I would have to say that it's one of the most transformative things to break out of what other people tell you to do and discover for yourself what can happen with your magical work. And I think that, this is why I like to challenge the notions of magic and how they are framed. And this notion of one true way of doing things. And so, you see that in pop culture magic because it's an excellent way to really explore stuff.
So when you're looking at pop culture magic and you're basically using characters as a retelling of a deity that may have been worshipped, thousands of years ago, is it important to find, say, a character that has abilities, say a superhero, for example, that you would want to work with that energy to manifest something? Or can it literally be any character? Could we have a cult of Kramer out there for Seinfeld fans that, works with the energy, the chaotic energy of Cosmo Kramer to manifest changes in themselves?
I think you can work with any pop culture character that you want to. I think it should be relevant to you. I think that a lot of times people who get into pop culture magic will think initially okay, got to work with what's most popular. But I would say to that, no, work with what is relevant to you. If Cosmo Kramer is relevant to you, then we'll work with Kramer. If that's what matters to you. And I think that's more important than anything else. Work with what personally is relevant to you, what speaks to you, what you connect with. Because people who want connection with the world around them are going to naturally gravitate toward what makes most sense to them. This is why pop culture magic really works, because pop culture magic is relevant to the majority of people who practice magic in a way that is, I think it just can't be escaped, you know? Mm-hmm. We all know what Seinfeld is. It's a TV show. Even if you've never really watched an episode of Seinfeld, you know what it is.
Yeah.
At least if you're in America. And maybe in other countries as well. I mean, I don't want to speak for other countries, but I'm assuming that at least in some of the other countries that might be listening to this show or listening to this show right now, that they probably would know. And if they don't know and they look it up, guess what? They've just gotten infected by the Seinfeld meme.
Yeah.
So I mean, really, you know, pop culture can't be escaped unless you're like a hermit and you never interact with anybody at all. At some point, you're going to interact with pop culture. And we see it even, it's become expedited by, like, you know, the kinds of devices we have. We have smartphones. You know, the smartphones bring us all kinds of notifications and updates and things like that. You know, people are on different social networks. That kind of stuff brings its own thing. It basically means that when it comes right down to it, your magical practice is going to be influenced to some degree or another by pop culture. That's just my perspective on the matter. But I think that I see it a lot with people who practice magic, that it is to some degree or another, there is some influence of pop culture coming into play. And that's one of the reasons why I've written those books, because I saw that a long time ago, and I came up with some very interesting realizations and magical work that could help me take what was already there and turn it into a viable system that could get results.
I like that a lot. Change gears just a little bit, and if you don't have an answer for this, that's totally fine, but it is the Paranormal Patio. I know we're talking about magic right now, which many, including myself and probably yourself, would argue magic is not paranormal. It's just the normal that most people don't think about. Have you had anything that you would consider a paranormal experience outside of the world of magic?
You know, I really can't say that, because I would say that all of my experiences have been informed by magic. I do think of magic as a paranormal experience, you know, because it is outside of normal reality. It's a transformative experience. But like when I think about the spirits that I've interacted and the way that my magical practice has been informed by different experiences that I've had, right down to the fact that I was drowned in the ocean when I was 7 years old and had an experience with a spirit that came through and basically connected with me. These are experiences that, you know, I can't disassociate magic from that, because magic plays such an essential role in my life. So I do see magic as a paranormal thing, actually, because it allows us to access alternate realities, to go beyond the normal consensual reality that most people want to live in and don't really, you know, the things that people don't want to necessarily acknowledge or recognize, that, you know, there's stuff going on out there that might be a little scary or different.
Yeah, for sure. I'm wrapped up in some of the high strangeness cases across the country, Kentucky in particular at the moment. Oftentimes it's people that have these experiences are the people who have been kind of marginalized or ostracized from society, but maybe they're not necessarily involved in magic, and most, I would argue, aren't. I mean, farmers that see UFOs and Bigfoot, perhaps, you know, when they're tending their land, they're not going home and doing these rituals and workings with deities or spirits. You know, they're just part of that normal, mundane life. And it's fascinating when someone is kind of slapped in the face with something that they can't explain, and then it just gets weirder and weirder from there. These sort of hot spots that kind of pop up for, you know, maybe a few days or weeks, or, you know, in some cases even years. And that kind of drives my personal research at the moment, and really getting into some of the things from before our technology scope had really expanded to where it is now, and people didn't have terminology. Going back and looking, and they're explaining it as this thing, but now we can recognize it as something else. I find those fascinating. I was just speaking with someone last week about the descriptions of UFOs and how they've changed over the years, and where we think that trend will go. You know, before the classic UFO flying saucer type of thing, there was people called flying ships, you know, because they had no frame of reference for describing what they were seeing, and they knew ships existed, but all of a sudden there's this ship that's in the air, that's moving through the air like it's the ocean or a river. So yeah, I look into those cases where you can take a step back and take that story and move it into modern time and look at it in a different way. And I find those absolutely fascinating.
There's an interesting apocryphal story about Christopher Columbus when he first came to the quote unquote New World, and when he, specifically to the islands that he found, and how the indigenous people there could not, like, they landed and everything else. The indigenous people that were there could not understand the ships because they'd never seen anything like it. So they literally could not process them or understand them. It's just kind of an interesting thing. Like when we look at paranormal reality is anything that takes us outside of normal everyday reality that we know and understand. And it invites us to go into the mysteries of the unknown and to discover in that process something about ourselves that we didn't know. This is the thing too. A lot of times people talk about magic, like getting results and all that. And it's cool. I mean, hey, let's get results. But magic is a lot more than that. Magic is what transforms your reality. It changes who and what you are. It is something that just totally should be factored in and recognized. And I think a lot of times when people get focused just on the results, they miss out on a fundamental realization, which I would say is actually central to my approach to space-time magic, but really to all my magical approach, which is, that when you do magical work to manifest a result, you're also manifesting a change in who and what you are, a change in your identity. And as a result, you become something else. You step into a new identity. And so you're always changing. Now, it can be said that, that's happening to some degree or another, even outside of magical work. But I think the difference is that with magical work, you're doing this very purposely. You're purposely changing your life and trying to discover who you are and what you can be. And these things can be very, very powerful if we allow them to be.
Yeah, that's fascinating. To just sit and think in your mind and go down that rabbit hole. I've done it before, and I'm doing it right now. I caught myself just kind of zoning into what you were saying and just floating in the abyss, trying to figure out, what am I doing? Where am I? And where am I going? And what am I going to manifest? It's fascinating to, even if you don't practice magic, to just think about it. And in a way, thinking about it is sort of, you're sort of putting yourself on that track anyway. And it's something that a lot of people don't think about. But what I wanted to, you brought something up, and it kind of ties in with what I was saying about looking at how descriptions come in the future for things that we see now. Where do you think we will see, how do you think we will see magic in the next 50 to 100 years? Do you think it will still be totally written off as bonkers by, the majority of the population? Or do you think that we're going to start to see recognition for the possibilities of what we can accomplish?
I think we're already seeing an acceptance of magic more so than we've seen previously. And I think it's interesting because when you look at some of like modern day physics and other things, you actually see some similar conclusions being reached, So I think there is kind of this growing acceptance of magic. In terms of where I see magic going, I'll put it this way. I've always been out there on the edge with magic. I mean, my approach has always been about evolving magical practice and bringing it into the modern. And I'm not saying that, the classic approach is wrong or bad or that it can't be used. I think anyone who, you get great results and things. And I would say, sometimes there's a lot of stuff that you can discover in that can actually be very helpful. But for myself, I've always been interested in where could magic go? And how do we integrate it into modern day disciplines? And how do we take those modern day disciplines and use it to inform our approach to magic? For example, I'm reading right now a series of books, essentially called The Process of Life. And it's all about how to basically create a living space through architectural design. Now, I'm not an architectural person. I never will be. But I'm finding it really fascinating and interesting because of how it's informing my approach to magical work. It's one of those things where I'm like, it's helping me look at the world in a fundamentally different way. And I'm just absolutely fascinated and blown by what I'm discovering, because it's making me think well, how could this architectural notion of creating life in a building be applied to creating a magical space? But also, how could it be applied to magical work in general? And I think that this is an important thing. Now, a lot of people will say, well, why stretch yourself out there? Magic works. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, all that other stuff, yada, yada, yada. My response to that would be, when we stop evolving with the times, and when we stop evolving our practice and our discipline with the other disciplines that are out there, that's when things become stagnant. And at some point, that's when it stops being taken seriously. And I think it's really important that we continually examine things. And again, honor the roots, honor where things have come. And I have friends who do like a lot of work with ancient magic. My friend Allison Tchaikovsky, for example, does some really amazing stuff. And I've bought her products and services, and I highly recommend her. Not knocking it at all, And I know other people who have these approaches. And again, these things are very powerful. And I would say, don't knock what has come before. Not at all. But I'm also saying, look at what's around us and how can we integrate what's around us and turn it into a magical practice as well. And that's where my interest is. And it's just a different thing. Most people aren't doing that. Most of the people I see out there writing books on magic or talking about their magical practice, it's very much grounded in like what has come before. And that's cool. But I think, where would I like to see magic go? That's what my books are about. And whether or not magic will go that way, well, we'll see. If you talked to me over 10 years ago and talked about pop culture magic, I said, well, not too many people are interested in it. But now lots of people are. That has become a regular part of magical practice. And it's transformed the way people think about magic. So, I think that there is something to be said for continuing to evolve where magic is going and what it can be.
That's a good take. I like that a lot. I think I have one more question, and then I'll turn the floor over to you to kind of tell everyone where they can find, your books and all that good stuff. But my last question for you is, what is your best advice that you would give to someone who says, I think that I am ready to step into this path and start working with magic in my life?
My best advice would be pick up a book or two. It doesn't have to be mine. It can be anyone's really, but pick up a book or two and really read that book and work that book. Work the exercises in it. Read it a couple times. That's what I did when I started out. Really work it until you understand it, and then start asking yourself what you would change or improve upon, and start reading other books and do the same process. Because that's what's going to help you to do one of two things. The first thing, it's going to help you develop a foundational approach to magic. You're going to learn the fundamentals. And that's going to help you with any interest you have down the line with magic. But the second thing it's going to teach you is how to apply critical thinking to magic and how to evolve it and turn it into something that is your own. You should always make your magical practice your own. One of the things that I've tried to do in my books is really encourage people to read the books and make the practices in them their own. And as I always try to wrap up, the final book or the final word I always try to say is like, look, this is just my take on things. I'm not necessarily 100% right or whatever. Like, take it and use it and make it your own. And I think that that's like the best thing you can do, make it your own path, because that's how magic's meant to be practiced. There's not meant to be a one true way. And the people who do the one true way kind of things are usually really invested in being spiritual gurus and all the mess that comes with that. I'm not personally interested in that. I don't think we need spiritual gurus. We need people who are spiritual seekers who are really actively going out into the world and asking themselves, not just how can I get something I want? How can I transform the world into a better place? How can I take what I'm doing and make it my own, but at the same time really do it in a way that's constructive for changing reality? And I think like when we start to work that way and think that way, it changes who and what we are and the way that our lives function and work.
Sage advice from Taylor Ellwood. Prolific, absolutely prolific author with many more books coming down the stream. And I'm looking forward to finishing the book I have. And I think I might be digging into some pop culture books from you here before too long. I think this conversation has instilled a little bit more curiosity in me. And, who knows, you may be talking right now to a future member of the Cult of Kramer. Who knows?
Yeah, you never know.
So, yeah, before I let you go, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing a bit of, who you are and what you're working with. And I'd like to give you the floor to do your whole entire sales pitch. Take as long as you need, as much time as you want. It's all yours. Where can people find you? What books would you recommend they pick up? Anything that you have to say on the matter?
All right, thank you. Well, first of all, I write fiction, which you can find at www.imagineyourreality.com. And if you're interested in superhero fiction or zombie apocalypse fiction with a comedic take, check that out. I also do write about self-publishing at www.indieauthorbusinesssuccess.com. And I have a book out as well as classes on that. So if you're interested in publishing your own books and want to learn the ropes, I can help you with that. And then finally, if you visit magicalexperiments.com, you can find my books on Magick. And also I offer classes on Magick, and I also do different types of spiritual consulting on Magick. Spirit petitions, tarot readings, magical consultations, whatever it is that you're interested in. All of those things are available there. Plus, you get to read some amazing articles that I write. I write on a regular basis. And I also have my own video channel / podcast where I interview people on occasion. So check all of that out. And yeah, that's it from me. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I hope to be back again someday.
Absolutely. 100%. We'll have you back on. No problem. We'll just have to make it through the onslaught of bookings I already have scheduled. I think I had you booked for a little while, so that's very common. Very common. Thank you again so much, Taylor, for coming on and talking with everyone. I will put links to your websites in the show notes, and everybody will be able to click on the description for this episode that you're listening to right now and just click the links. You don't even have to type. I do all the work for you. It's tremendous. Thanks again, Taylor. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you on the next one.
Until next time, keep the fire going.